ॐ सहनाववतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यङ्करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। We are starting chapter 13, practice of brahmacharya or continence, specific instructions for the celibate. Prasad Maharaj, we are recording the session. Only my voice is recorded, so your comments and questions will not be recorded. Necessity of brahmacharya. Swami Vivekananda laid great emphasis on continence. He used to tell his disciples, brahmacharya should be like a fire tingling in your veins. In his Raja Yoga, he says that through continence, sex energy is converted into a higher form of psychic energy called ojas. The yogis say that part of the human energy which is expressed as sex energy in sexual thought, when checked and controlled, easily becomes changed into ojas, and as the Muladhara guides these, the yogi pays particular attention to that center. He tries to take up all the sexual energy and convert it into ojas. It is only the chaste man or woman who can make the ojas rise and store it in the brain. That is why chastity has always been considered the highest virtue. A man feels that if he is unchaste, spirituality goes away, he loses mental vigor and moral stamina. That is why in all the religious orders in the world, which have produced spiritual giants, you will always find absolute chastity insisted upon. That is why the monks came into existence, giving up marriage. There must be perfect chastity in thought, word and deed. Without it, the practice of Raja Yoga is dangerous and may lead to insanity. If people practice Raja Yoga and at the same time lead an impure life, how can they expect to become yogis? This is from the complete works of Swami Vivekananda, published in 1972, volume 1, page 170. In the spiritual teachings of Swami Brahmananda, we read, to secure the full development and vitality of the body, brain and mind, brahmacharya is essential. Those who observe strict brahmacharya develop a strong memory and a remarkable capacity for understanding. By means of brahmacharya, a special nerve is developed which brings about these wonderful powers. Do you know why our great teachers have laid so much emphasis on brahmacharya? It is because they knew if a man fails in this respect, everything is lost. The strict brahmacharyan does not lose his vitality. He may not look like a pahalwan, a great athlete, but the development of his brain is so fine that his capacity for grasping super sensuous things is remarkable. This is from Swami Prabhavananda, the Eternal Companion, published in 1978, page 238. Once Swami Brahmananda told me, my boy, give your body and mind to worldly enjoyments and the world will destroy them both. Devote them to God and His service and you will enjoy bodily health, peace of mind and spiritual joy. So this is also from Swami Prabhavananda. I think it's probably the same page 84. Give all that you have, your health, wealth, youth, talents, everything to the divine. If you give it to the world will spoil it and leave you empty in the end. The forces of avidya and destruction are everywhere. Forgetting this, we rush thoughtlessly into worldly life. Forgetting that if we rush thoughtlessly into worldly life, we will have to suffer the consequences. Forgetting this, if we rush thoughtlessly into worldly life, we will have to suffer the consequences. One of the difficulties about the observance of continence is that we see people getting along and thriving without that. This may be true in worldly life. Brahmacharya may not make you an intellectual prodigy or a wrestler, though it definitely improves the mind and body. But the main purpose of brahmacharya is the development of the spiritual faculty, the spiritual nerve called Medha Nadi, referred to by Swami Brahmananda. When a man practices brahmacharya for 10 or 12 years, he feels the awakening of this nerve or faculty in him. It is the power of intuition latent in all men. Sri Ramakrishna, and there's a footnote here for that. This is from the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, published in 1974, pages 362 to 663. So, Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda have spoken about this. It is not a mere theory. Moreover, brahmacharya is essential for the nourishment and vigor of the brain. People who do not observe brahmacharya find their brain getting heated up quickly when they try to meditate. Sustained contemplation is impossible unless the brain is strong and cool. Without continence, the brain will not be able to withstand the tremendous strain of long hours of meditation. Really speaking, brahmacharya is absolutely necessary in higher spiritual life, although people are not told about this very plainly to avoid discouraging them at the very beginning of their spiritual life. 1 minute. The real truth is there can never be any real meditation, any higher realization without unbroken brahmacharya in thought, word and deed. Without perfect continence and purity, higher spiritual life does not become natural. But we usually talk about it in a milder and less direct way so as to not upset people. The first task in spiritual life is to open the higher centers of consciousness. Meditation has to be practiced in one of the higher centers, and for this it has to be opened first. How can this be done if the lower centers are intensely active? The sum total of psychic energy left free for higher activity is not much. If all this is diverted to lower centers, the higher centers will not develop. If the working of the lower centers is not stopped, the spiritual aspirant will never be able to keep himself on a higher plane, whatever people may say or think. Really speaking, there can be no spiritual life if these lower centers are allowed to function. Stop their work. Unless you do this, the higher centers can never work properly. When the water taps in the ground floor of a building are all open, you find little or no water available on the upper floors. Some people may get some glimpses of mystic visions even without observing the strictest brahmacharya, but they can never succeed in remaining on the higher plane, and no higher form of realization can never ever be attained by them. Brahmacharya is to be observed under all circumstances if the aspirant wants to attain to any higher life and to any higher form of realization. There is no other way out. This is the plain truth about spiritual life. Wrong notions about continence in the West. The trouble in the West is that there the spiritual ideal has been lowered very much and dragged down to the plane of mere mortals. Nobody bothers about direct superconscious realization. People are so beggarly that they are satisfied with very little. Just a little good mood is enough for them. And then they go and make much of it. Moral life is not spiritual life, though a really spiritual person will always act morally, as it has become habitual and natural to him. Conventional morality alone is not enough for higher spiritual experience. A thorough overhauling of personality is needed. This is the gist of Christ's Sermon on the Mount. Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. This is from the Bible, St. Matthew's 5:48. The religion that Christ taught was essentially a religion for the monk. Something of the self-denial and discipline of the monastic way of life is essential for every spiritual aspirant, even if he is a householder, if he wants to gain some genuine spiritual experience. Protestantism, by discarding celibacy and monasticism, has done a great harm to the spiritual tradition in the West. Modern psychologists have done a great service to humanity by their researches into the nature of the unconscious, dreams, motivation, complexes, repression, etc. But very many of them have, in effect, done an equal amount of harm by propagating the theory of free expression. Though many eminent psychoanalysts have protested against this abuse of a noble science, the idea that suppression of sex is harmful has rapidly gained popularity in the West. The yoga psychology, on the contrary, believes that conscious suppression of sex with a spiritual aim is not only not harmful but also absolutely essential. Repression may be dangerous, but not yogic suppression followed by sublimation of the sex instinct through love of God and meditation. At first, this may lead to tension and conflicts, but then, is there any higher venture which does not cause some tension or struggle? The true and earnest spiritual aspirant soon overcomes all internal troubles and through divine grace reaches a higher plane where he is free from the conflicts of the lower planes. Nowadays, there is an attempt in the West to popularize Vedanta without stressing purity of mind. Many people in the West feel drawn to Advaita because of its loftiness and logical beauty. But intellectual appreciation alone is not enough. Many people think that Advaita does not need the practice of brahmacharya and other virtues. This is not true. On the contrary, it demands the strictest control of mind and senses. A Jivan Mukta or a liberated man may not pay much attention to social conventions, but never does he, nor can he, violate the fundamental virtues like chastity. These have become his second nature. In the Vedanta Sara, we find a passage that says, if a man who has known the truth of oneness acts according to his whims, then where is the difference between a knower of truth and a dog as regards eating impure stuff? This is from Sadananda Yogindra's Vedanta Sara, translated by Swami Vivekananda, published in 1974, page 121, and that passage in turn is quoted from Sureshwaracharya's Naishkarmya Siddhi 4.62. Testimony of great saints. In the higher forms of Christianity, Buddhism and Hinduism, great stress has been laid on the observance of perfect brahmacharya in thought, word and deed. You find it in the Sermon on the Mount, in the Vinaya Pitaka of Buddhism, in the Upanishads, in the Gita and in the Bhagavatam. A socially accepted form of moral life alone is not enough for a spiritual aspirant. He must attain perfection in moral virtues, especially chastity. He must totally control his sex instinct. The great mystics of the world always gave the highest importance to chastity. The words of Brother Giles, who was originally an illiterate peasant, but who later on became one of the foremost disciples of Saint Francis of Assisi, are to be remembered by every spiritual aspirant. Amongst all other virtues, I would set the virtue of chastity first, because sweet chastity contains all perfection in itself. But there is no other virtue which can ever be perfect without chastity. Chastity is in strict truth the careful and continual custody of our corporeal and spiritual senses in order to preserve them pure and immaculate for God alone. Every vice troubles and obscures the fair glory of holy chastity, for it is like a bright mirror which is clouded and darkened, not only by contact with impure and defiling things, but by the mere breath of man. It is impossible for man to attain to any spiritual grace so long as he is inclined to carnal concupiscence, and therefore, whithersoever thou turn thyself, thou shalt never be able to attain to spiritual grace until thou canst master all the vices of the flesh. Therefore, fight valiantly against thy frail and sensual flesh, thine own worst enemy, which wages war against thee day and night. And know that he who shall overcome this mortal enemy of ours has most certainly defeated and discomfited all his other enemies, and shall attain to spiritual grace and every degree of virtue and perfection. This is from the teachings of Brother Giles, published in 1955. Brahmacharya is undoubtedly the first thing required in spiritual life, and people who are not prepared to observe perfect continence in thought, word, and deed will never be able to remain on the higher plane, even if they obtain some glimpses of higher truths. They will fall down again and again, and the highest realization in the higher forms of spiritual life can never be attained by them. Practice of Brahmacharya, physical aids. Now the question is, how to practice strict continence? What are the rules to be observed? First of all, make it a point never to give the enemy a frontal attack. There is an art of fighting the senses which must be learned. Never be too violent. Sometimes, without first creating the right mood, we want to overcome the senses by extreme violence. That is very dangerous and should never be attempted. Sometimes, remaining in a lower mood, we try to control ourselves in a most violent manner without rising to a higher plane. Then naturally there comes the most violent reactions, physical as well as mental, and our whole progress is retarded or even stopped altogether. So, with an effort of the will, we should first raise the mind and create the higher mood, and then with a little force, everything is accomplished. We should never quote the danger of violent reactions. Regarding this point, Brother Giles gives a fine advice. He who wishes to move a large stone or any other great weight and carry it to any other place must try to move it rather by ingenuity than by force. And so, if you wish to desire to overcome the vice of impurity and to acquire the virtue of chastity, you must set to work rather by way of humility and by a good discreet method of spiritual discipline than by a rash and presumptuous use of penitential austerities. What a wonderful advice. Just think of the lever action, the action of a crowbar, for instance. The simple device enables you to raise great heavy weights which you can never move with your bare hands. The fun is, with reference to the things of the world, we are so wise and careful, so ingenious and practical. But with reference to spiritual life and practice, we are so foolish and careless. But in the case of the great mystics, the opposite is true. They were intensely practical in the spiritual side. They were indifferent to worldly prosperity, but extremely alert and methodical regarding spiritual matters. People try to employ various physical means to overcome the sex drive. Some of these have a limited effect, but one should not depend on them too much. Swami Brahmananda says, there are certain rules which a brahmacharian must observe. He must avoid exciting food, oversleeping, over-exercise, laziness, bad company, and evil conversations. This is from the Eternal Companion, 1978, page 238. This reminds us of Gita, chapter 6, verse 17. Yuktahara viharasya, yukta cheshtasya karmasu, yukta swapnavabodhasya, yogo bhavati dukkha. Some people try violent physical exercise. Though this takes off the surplus energy, it is never the right method. Those who want to practice brahmacharya should see that they don't accumulate more energy in their body than they can handle. If they find more vital energy rising in them, they should reduce their food for a few days. There is a basic creative urge in all of us. If this is not sublimated and directed to a higher channel, it tries to find expression in lower centers. Those beginners who find it impossible to think of God always, who cannot transmute all their energy into meditation, prayer and worship of the Lord, should employ themselves in some creative work. Along with this, studies and deep thinking are also helpful. Always keep the higher centers active. Regulated breathing is a great help in keeping the mind calm. When the mind is restless, all sorts of when the mind is restless, all sorts of emotions and impulses crop up. Practice rhythmic breathing always. This will give you uh, a sense of control over your entire body and will make your mind alert. But this does not mean pranayama, which is dangerous for the majority of aspirants to practice. Instead of that, just practice rhythmic breathing. One of the most important habits to be cultivated by all is cleanliness of body. Keep your body and clothes clean and pure. Bathing and washing should not be taken as a ritual as is often done in India. Physical cleanliness must be associated with mental cleanliness. The most important point is to attain purity of mind. Patanjali says, by the practice of purity, there arises aversion to one's own body and disgust for contact with other bodies. This is from the Patanjali Yoga Sutra 2.40. Shauchat Swang Jagupsa Parai Samsarga. Actually, I've come across this before. However, this should not degenerate into what psychologists call washing mania, which is a kind of mental disease. Commenting on the above sutra of Patanjali, Swami Vivekananda says, where there is real purification of the body, external, internal, there arises an elegance to the body, and the key idea of keeping it nice vanishes. A face which others will call most beautiful will appear to the yogi as merely animal, if there is not intelligence behind it. What the world calls a very common face, he regards as heavenly if the spirit shines behind it. This thirst after body is the great bane of human life. So the first sign of the establishment of purity is that you do not care to think you are a body. It is only when purity comes that we get rid of body idea. This is from the complete works of Swami Vivekananda, volume 1, page 264. Holy company is of great help in the observance of chastity, contact with pure-hearted people who themselves have observed strict continence has a profound influence on struggling aspirants. But in order to profit by this contact, the aspirant should avoid the company of immoral people. Nothing is more harmful for the maintenance of brahmacharya than the company of bad elements. I will stop here. We're on page 216. Next time we'll start the section called sex control at the mental level. I will stop the recording and then you can have any questions or discussion.